here we go from the frying pan into the fire. So there were three sectors that we thought it most important to spend time with and focus attention on this year: energy, real estate, and of course it just wouldn't be a distressed sector conversation without retail. So I'm very thankful and appreciative to have four experts here. Perry, you've enjoyed being with us, and we've enjoyed having you in previous years. I was just on the broadcast with Carol Massar and Bloomberg, and the question was, should we expect that since the troubles in the retail sector began in 2008, 2010, should we expect them to continue? And my response was, I don't believe they only began in 2008 and 2010. And until there's a governor of retail, I can't imagine that we aren't going to be having the same conversation 20 years from now.
That's right.
But Stephen, I know you very thoughtfully prepared to lead this group through the conversation, and I think if everybody is here, I'll let you go.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Fleming, a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers Business Recovery Services practice. I realize we are the last session after a long day, and the only thing standing between poolside drinks on a beautiful afternoon, so we'll try to stick to our time allotment here. Let me start off by introducing our distinguished panel here. To my left, we've got Van Dur, who's a partner at Skadden Arps, and to his left is Perry Mandarino, who is the National Practice Leader of PricewaterhouseCoopers Business Recovery Services Group. And to his left is Anthony Palazzi, who's a Managing Director at Sun Capital. So we'll hopefully give you a perspective from the legal community, from financial advisors, as well as that of private equity investors. So we've heard a lot come up through the day on various panels touching retail in one way, shape, or form. We're going to try to bring some fresh ideas to the conversation. A couple of the themes that we did hear about today are the trends between reorganizations versus quick 363 sales or liquidations. We'll talk about that in some detail. We also want to talk about the role of management and how perhaps some of the skills required to run a national retailer has changed over the past 5 or so years as compared to 10 or 15 years ago. And finally, we're going to touch upon the importance of the brand to retailers. So let me start off with you, Van. Are some of the challenges faced today by management teams new problems or old problems?
There's a combination, I would say. First of all, Judge Rhodes stole one of my quotes this morning, which I stole from one of my partners, which is, denial is not just a river in Egypt. It's a major problem among management teams. So to the extent that you have management that just believe that they're just one quarter away from turning things around, that continues to exist. That's an old problem. The new problem that you have specific to retail is e-commerce, and in particular social media. E-commerce continues to outperform brick and mortar by multiples, and it's the ability to harness that power and that growth that is a brand new challenge to senior management, particularly when senior management is my age or perhaps even older, and is not tweeting as much as they should, and is still trying to figure out what exactly a tweet is. One of the retail segments that's in tremendous trouble right now, specialty fashion, and a lot of these retailers are so-called fast fashion. Well, fast fashion is reacting to trends. And if you're not completely plugged into social media and reacting literally instantly to new trends, you will quickly lose your demographic. And that's one of the new challenges that I see for retailers.
Great. Perry, Anthony, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, well, I'll say it's not just the social media, it's the the fast fashion van, as you called it. So what could companies do? I know of a few companies who are wholesalers who are actually opening up manufacturing facilities in places like Honduras, for example. So the turnaround time from China is drastically cut in half, right? So it's not just, okay, what do we need to tweak today, but how do we get the product which becomes hot into the store quickly and at a cost-effective basis? So that's a change in management that was sort of an offshoot of social media and e-commerce.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, one of the interesting things is just the pace of business and how rapidly it's changing. And retail and technology and social media have just accelerated that. And so, I mean, think about the dynamic of a world we live in where Target can go and say, I'm going to expand into a new market, be there in a major way, and then just a few years later say, whoops, I'm going to back out entirely, right? I mean, that kind of thing would have been unheard of 15, 20 years ago, right? To shift gears so quickly, both in one direction and then back in the other. And so that's the kind of environment that you need the people with the skills to be able to navigate today. And it goes well beyond just e-commerce, but that's one of the great facilitators of that environment.
Yeah, I mean, Macy's, I think, announced that they were shutting at least 14 stores in the first quarter of 15. That's a lot of employees.
Yeah.
That's a lot of Macy's stores.
So sticking on the theme, Perry, based on your experience, how much has management action or inaction, for that matter, resulted in some of the bankruptcies or failures that you've seen?
Well, I guess it's always easy to play Monday morning quarterback and say, management should have done X, Y, or Z. However, Dave's comment that the retail only started in 2008. I've been in the business since 1987, and I've had a retail client, I think, every year since then. So management is a key. It's reacting. It's, look at what good management teams do, or very strong and well-financed management teams do. I think it's easier to be a good manager if you have money, if you have liquidity, right? So when you look at the big public companies like Bed Bath & Beyond, who have, a gazillion dollars in cash on their balance sheet, it's easy to be able to squeeze your vendors, and it's easy to be able to get good talent to work underneath you, because nothing is just one person. Nothing. As much as we like to think we're so important, as a manager in our own businesses, we're not successful without the people that we have working with us, without our teams, and the same thing goes for retailers. And so the ability to attract good talent, the ability to work with your vendors, the ability to invest in IT, all makes you a better manager if you have the liquidity to do that.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that I tend to think the story might have ended up the same way, but it gets accelerated depending on whether or not the team is, if you have a great team and you're swimming upstream, they may be able to delay the tide for a while, but it is hard to swim upstream forever, right? And, same vice versa. If you've got a great company, they may make it a little bit worse, but it's hard to blame the management team entirely in a lot of these situations, but they do exacerbate the issue for sure.
Well, you have to come up with brand new strategies that never existed before because the competition never existed before. Remember, when Perry started his practice, the concept of showrooming didn't exist, right? This is where a consumer will go into a brick and mortar retailer store, will play with the gadgets and make sure they find exactly the one they want, and then look on their phone on Amazon and buy it off of Amazon for less. That concept didn't exist, 15, 20 years ago. But managers have to figure out ways around it. My daughter is actually involved in a startup right now where she is working with the management team to develop ways to put products out on the market that literally Amazon can't see, so they can't be showroomed. And obviously there's a challenge between how do you access your customer and prevent Amazon's access at the same time. But it's figuring out those new technologies to combat these new strategies is what management needs to do to survive.
That's interesting. So Anthony, from a buyer's perspective, in a distressed situation, how do you evaluate whether the management team has the skills necessary to turn around a business?
Yeah, it can be difficult at times, obviously, because sometimes there's so much noise in the air around what's going on with the distressed, especially in retail with the distressed investment, that it's hard to pick apart the pieces that caused it, right? Was it the locations? Was it was it e-commerce intrusion? Was it, just lack of capital? Was it, right, a bad owner? I mean, all these things can play into how you got into trouble. But typically what we find when we look at management teams is that we're really looking for a certain decisiveness, a certain set of actions. We've historically seen in distressed retail that a lot of times people get disenfranchised at a certain point. And so you do see the team kind of say, well, I'm kind of underwater, I'm not really incented. And then you see them, start to, make decisions that are kind of shooting for the home run or just not be as directly engaged. But in a lot of cases, you do still find that the team's, they've got an idea, they've got a way to go, but they were just too far behind the 8 ball by the time they had a chance to act on it. And so you're trying to piece apart those two dynamics and see if you can pick, which one is the overriding driver.
Okay, great. So let's switch topics for a second. We've heard throughout the day on a couple of occasions this whole, I think somebody said a quote in the last 10 or so years, they can count on one hand the number of reorganizations in the retail sector. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So there's been a recent wave over the past 24 months of retail bankruptcies, primarily in specialty retail, that have either been very quick 363 sales or have resulted in liquidations. And Perry, let me start with you. What are some of the drivers of this trend?
It's really enterprise value, because think of a normal corporate finance transaction. There's leverage on a business, on a non-retail business. There's leverage on it that there usually is some room for equity value. However, in retailers, most of the retailers' leverage is gotten through asset-based loans, right? And the asset-based loans are to such an extent because the collateral is there, but it eats into enterprise value. So an example, you have a company with $50 million of an asset-based loan and $60 million of inventory, let's say, and they don't have liquidity. Is a buyer going to come in that situation and really put in new capital that's still junior to the $50 million of enterprise value if, for example, in this example, if EBITDA is only $5 million? That's 10 times leverage. It doesn't make sense, right? I mean, would you look at that, Anthony?
Nope.
Would you? Exactly. and this is a guy that's writing the checks, right? So now there are exceptions, right? Some notable ones like Brookstone, which was a plan where there was a stalking horse bidder, incredible auction that I was at, and the company was sold. I mean, that's one of the few true reorganizations, and why a company like that has such a a niche, right? It's a different market. Trade claims were paid 100 cents. All leases were assumed. A pretty unusual case. I hate to use the word unique, but in the past year, that may be a one-of-a-kind type of transaction.
Yeah, I also think, too, it's important as you think about it that when you think about the dynamics around retail, which are different from, say, restaurants, which are also a multi-unit kind of situation. In restaurants, lenders know that if the thing goes to liquidation, they're in real trouble. I mean, real trouble, right? Because there isn't much value left. And so the challenge is that forces two things. One is problems tend to get dealt with a little bit earlier. Not all the time, but a lot of times they get dealt with a little bit earlier because the lender knows that that if it goes bad, it could be a real problem for them. So they tend to force action a little bit sooner in the process. Whereas with the retail business, they may allow it to go a lot longer, knowing that they're covered from a collateral perspective, right? And for the business to get kind of further behind. And then the second thing is that when it does reach that point where the lender's starting to worry about collateral, they move very quickly then at that point because they don't want to get more impaired and they know they can get out whole. And so if you see a business that's getting close to bankruptcy, a lot of times then the lender is forcing, hey, let's just liquidate. Let's just go to a GOB or let's go to an auction and we'll get the Hilcos and the Gordon Brothers and we're covered, so take that bid, as opposed to letting the process, try and go to a point where you might be able to get a going concern more involved because, then the lender has to take risks that their collateral might diminish over time, and that push-pull creates a lot of, difficulty in kind of getting these restructurings done on the retail side.
And what's your perspective on these quick liquidations versus going concern sales?
Candidly, and we debated this a bit in preparing for this, but candidly, my number one cause is the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005. One of the major changes in the law was to shrink the time that a retailer could decide whether to assume or reject leases. In other words, pick and choose which stores will go forward and which stores will close, from forever, theoretically, and it was years before, typically, to 210 days at the outside. This was, a landlord insisted upon reform to the law, if I can use that term loosely, and it changed the way retailers are financed. We saw this in Circuit City. We saw it in all the bookstore cases, and we've seen it in every case since the end of 2005. DIP loans mature in 180 days as a result of BAP CPA, and a retailer really only has 90 or 120 days, it's really 90 days, to put forward a plan that has a reasonable chance of being confirmed. Otherwise, the DIP lender will pull the trigger and say you're flipping to a GOB. It's exactly how Circuit City went down. And there's no, so if you think about a traditional retailer before, in a perfect world, a retailer would bring on new management with better skills, would try and reconnect with its demographic, and then would want to test these new approaches in a perfect world over 2 Christmases. Your first Christmas would be to build cash to file. You file in January, you implement your ideas, you get to Christmas number 2. Did it work? Did it not work? If it worked, you reorganize. If it didn't work, you liquidate. That was sort of the paradigm. 210 days, there's no 200-day block of time within which to deploy a strategy. If you file in January when you're cash rich, which was the conventional wisdom, then you're out of time in July. July is not a season for retail selling for any retailer I know. If you try to wait and stretch your catch to get to July, to get to Christmas, the problem is the world's going to know this is happening because you're in trouble. You will be almost out of cash, and July, August is when you're making your holiday season orders. So you have no ability to execute your new strategy for that Christmas. So it made retail reorganizations all but impossible. And one of the debates we had is this sort of a chicken-egg concept where did this, cause an impact on enterprise value, or is enterprise value driving it? I'm not sure I know the answer, but that's where I'm staking my claim.
Right, and I was on the other side of that debate with Van, because I'm not sure you could just blame the...
You can't blame Congress? Come on.
Well, there's so many other things that they have, or blame the real estate lobby. I think what happens, especially in today's brick and mortar environment, is that I think landlords are willing to give an extension to the 210 days. The thing is, how many of us are going to those landlords on day one of the case and saying, hey, we need you to extend, the time to assume or reject, right? I think that's something.
Or will the ABL lender let you?
Or well, the ABL lender may let you if you could show them a comprehensive plan. But what's more important is your second point, which is the enterprise value, right? Because if you don't have enough, gas in the tank to get going, because liquidity is needed, again, in your example of a Christmas, of a November, December retailer, right? Because Christmas has different seasons, like specialty apparel, a lot of their Christmas is prom season, right? Or the spring or Easter. Steve and I had a client that Easter was their biggest season. They went through 2 reorganizations, but they're doing okay now.
Right, and jewelry gets a couple of pops a year.
And jewelry gets a couple pops a year. So it's a matter of, having the liquidity and having the real concept of a business plan. I mean, in all due respect to any retailer, some brands are just not missed, right? It doesn't matter if there's not an X, young women's fashion clothing, or a Y, electronics retailer, because there's so many other options. So maybe it's not the the amendment to the code, but maybe it's just that the world's changing, right? And you don't need 50 different retailers in the same hallway in the mall that sell the same thing.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
people-
that I definitely agree with, but I will say that, you know, from a buyer perspective, what the timing does do is it means most of the time, either whether it's one of our portfolio companies or something we're looking at, what it means is most of the time you have to go into bankruptcy already with the idea of exactly what the business is going to look like coming out. Because if you haven't already gotten there, there's just not enough time to get there in the form of a bankruptcy. And so what that means is, if you're the buyer, if you're a new buyer coming in, and they've already, and you basically get presented to you, here's kind of the game plan. And then you have to decide whether or not, without a whole lot of time to figure it out, whether or not you really buy that game plan. And there's not much credibility because the last game plan didn't work, or they wouldn't be here, right?
Right.
And, you know, and there's not a whole lot of time to vet out and see if that strategy is working, right?
Yep.
So there is a lot of this, you know, it's hard to get comfortable with, you know, the Circuit Cities or Radio Shacks or some of these where they're big turnarounds, to get comfortable in a very short amount of time that, you know, there is a game plan that will work, you know, when you don't have the time to see any of it in process, right? And that, so there is a little bit of that dynamic that creates some pressure around the going concern, for sure.
Right, and those were two good examples. So Radio Shack is one good example, and Wet Seal is another, where the company's developed a business strategy. You know, it's going to be, you know,
Right, we're going to
Radio
close
Sprint
2/3
or
of the
Sprint
store, we're going
Shack
to do
and-
this, whatever.
right, shrink the footprint and
Right.
move on, and we'll see, you know, if those are successful. or
Right.
not.
I want to come back to a comment that was made a few minutes ago. And Perry, do you have a different perspective on the impact of liquidation firms, and you know, based on this present go round of liquidations as well as in the future?
Well, I mean, you know, it's tempting for an asset-based lender to want to liquidate because the liquidators guarantee them in an agency deal, they guarantee them basically to get paid as much as they could ever get paid without accepting the risk of operational losses. You know, what I find troubling is that sometimes you'll see in a borrowing base, right? You'll see in a borrowing base that the inventory is at 75% because that's what the appraisal says. But then liquidation, that same, you know, appraisal firm may be bidding on the liquidation at 94 cents, right? You know, that's, you know, different scenarios, right? Because one, you're liquidating right away versus the other is theoretical, but they should be the same, right? So there's a lot of other influences that happen in the market.
By the way, I've never seen them the same. So if you,
I never have.
they're always bid up
Right.
when it comes to the liquidation versus your advance rates.
Right, but you look at it, the difference is, it's just like, you could understand a 5-point
Right.
difference, an 8-point
No, it's usually
difference.
10,
Augment-
15 points.
Augmentation maybe is worth a couple more points, right?
Yep.
But when it's a 20-point difference,
Right.
right, that's, I don't know, that just something is concerning. Maybe that's just risk,
Yeah.
right?
All right. Well, moving on. Perry brought up an interesting point before. Just how dependent are retailers today on brands? Van, do you have a perspective on that?
I do. I think, I mean, you've got, you know, Walmart and Amazon, which are the behemoths, and I don't think that they're, I mean, obviously they have a brand, but their brand has become all-consuming. I mean, it's like water. But the other retailers, I think, have to rely on brands for their identity. And the evidence that I point to is that there are now companies, you know, Hilco Stream Bank is one, but you've got huge companies, Iconics, Authentic Brands, Sequential, where they just sort of snap up brands that they think will be lucrative and then exploit those brands through licensing deals. I mean, Iconics bought Nike. I mean, there's a huge branding model now, and so I think that is a good indication that if a company can survive solely on a brand and have no operations, right? No brick and mortar stores, no people, they don't sell anything, they just slap their label on something. That tells me that for retailers where brick and mortar is so challenged and e-commerce is everything, you got to have something to get the consumer's attention.
Yeah, it was interesting, you know, when even 10, 12 years ago when I joined Sun, a lot of retail was location, 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 right? I mean, everyone's heard that, right? That was the driver of the successful retail. If you were in the A location, in the right spot, you were going to be fine. Even if you didn't have a great business model, you were going to be fine because there was enough traffic and all that stuff. It was interesting there, the retail panel, or real estate panel before this, because they talked a lot about the dynamic of, you know, in A malls, you know, there's still real traffic, and, you know, you don't necessarily have to be a destination or have real brand value to drive people because there's enough traffic generation otherwise. But once you get outside of that, you really are competing basically on, you know, how do you drive traffic? Well, the only way you drive traffic is you have something unique experiential or a unique brand, right? And one of those two things has to exist in order to get people in your door. Otherwise, you know, they're going to go to the next one down, right? And so, you know, I think what you're seeing a lot of the, you know, when they were talking about the retail side, a lot of what you're seeing is more driven toward experiential type stuff, where if there isn't a brand involved, how do I make it experiential? How do I capitalize on people wanting somewhere else to deploy their time, a millennial, where they're willing to invest that time and effort? Or it's got to be brand driven, right, where they have to have it, and that brand becomes real powerful. And so, you know, those are the two sides of it, in our opinion, and you got to be one or the other.
I mean, just look at something, can use Bed Bath and Beyond again. Look what they do. They deliver, you could go online, if your kid's going to college or boarding school, I guess, you could go online and pick everything you need, and they'll deliver that. How, at like 20% off. I mean, how incredibly convenient is that, right? That's an experience. You want to go there, and when you go there to buy that, you're going to go there to buy other stuff. I mean, you know, they have new products in the store. They have food. They have other things. I mean, there was another conference we're at that some analyst was like really sluggish, really bearish on Bed Bath. I thought the guy was stoned because they have, you know, there's just so much there, and they don't have, you know, incredible competition, which is why maybe they're thriving, but the what's called fast fashion retailer isn't, because there's 50 options to buy the same, you know, $29.99 knit blouse.
Yeah, well, a couple things. So one of the sentiments that is circulating amongst the fast fashion segment is, well, every bankruptcy, you know, is good for the one that stays out, because, you know, there'll just be less players in the market. And, you know, your comment about Bed Bath & Beyond, remember Linens and Things?
Right.
Well, that was the only other player,
That's right.
right? And so that maybe that proves the point. But the other thing is that we are, to Anthony's point, there are now strategies where it's get the customer in the store. So now you've got shop online, but do the in-store pickup, and people think that that's a great convenience. For the retailer, just get the customer in the store. Come inside. I will try and sell you something else. That's why you get the email blast. That's why you get the loyalty reward programs and the coupons in the mail. Just come in, buy anything.
Well, sticking on the theme of brands, so Anthony, you know, how do you evaluate the strength of a company's brand, particularly in a distressed situation?
Yeah, so again, that can be a little bit difficult, just given, you know, how is it resonating with the consumer? What is it that's caused them to get into trouble? Is it that the brand has kind of gone weak and it doesn't resonate with today's consumer? Or is it, you know, in a lot of cases, the brand can still resonate. I mean, I'll give you a restaurant example. You know, we own Friendly's. It's a brand that a lot of people know from New York area and stuff like that. It's been around for a long time. But the delivery method for that doesn't resonate today in the same way. People used to go to, you know, diners and eat, and so that was a typical way of eating back then. So on the retail side, you get a lot of those where the brand still resonates. Oh, I went there when I was a kid or whatever, but it's just not relevant to the way the consumer, you know, uses it today, right? And so you have to have it's a dynamic around brands where you have to have a strong brand, but you also have to have it resonate with the consumer in a way that they want to use it today. And so, you know, for us, a lot of times that the way we're trying to get a handle on that is through consumer surveys and things like that as part of our diligence process, because you get the best idea by just going and asking. You know, ask the consumer how they're using the brand, why they think it's valuable, and what they're and whether or not it's worth it to them to shop there. And that's how you get a feeling of whether or not the 50 other people are replaceable, right, and interchangeable.
And that's why you go into the supermarket at least up in, New Jersey, and there's a whole rack in the freezer of Friendly's
Friendly's ice cream, that's
that
right.
my kids love, right?
Right. Because the brand still resonates, right? The delivery.
Yeah, well, Perry mentioned Brookstone. I mean, Brookstone is just an iconic brand. It says to you, cool new gadgets that
Right.
I've never seen before. I can look at them all in one place, and that's going to drive sales. And every IP valuation report I've seen, looks at, what royalty stream can you generate. So again, it's looking at this from the perspective of licensing. They don't go and try and figure out what someone would pay for it. They look at the royalty stream and then a multiple on that, and that's what that IP should be worth.
Right, but the brand's only worth it if you have a good product, right? What brand is the most successful retail brand right now? I bet 80% of the people have one in their pocket, and that's Apple.
Apple, right?
Right? It's a great brand. Why? Well, because they have, an awesome product.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Do you see any distinction between retailers who control their own brand? I mean, you think of Zara and H&M and Apple as all examples of really successful retailers, and what jumps out to me is they design and manufacture and they control their own brand.
Yeah, because that's margin. Because that's making the whole procurement process cheaper because they don't have factory skimming off the top. Like there's that new, relatively new retailer that's really has taken the place of all the fast fashion, Uniqlo or something like that. They make all their own stuff, right? They're all vertically integrated. That's worth, I don't know, 7 margin points, I'm guessing, if not more, right?
Right.
I mean,
Oh, yeah, at least. So the interesting thing there is, in my mind, is you're getting this bifurcation where you're getting guys like Walmart or Amazon. They just want to be the online mall or the mall for all these different brands, right? They want to be the collection place. And so you'll go there because there's just a critical mass of these brands or products to go use. And then you get, the very niche businesses, right? Where they say, you know what, I'm going to sell just a few. Apple is a niche retailer. I mean, it ends up just being massive because of how it resonates with the consumer, but it's a very niche retailer. I mean, they only have a few things in their store, right? And yet it drives huge volume. But so you kind of have to make that, you're either going to try and be all things to everyone and have a big collection, or you got to be very niche and have something with a brand that's very powerful. And so, the ones that get in trouble are the ones that get caught in the middle, where you're trying to be this, but you don't have the scale to be all things to everyone.
Yeah,
right?
no, Uniqlo is a good example. Superdry is another example. Where was Superdry 5 years ago?
Right,
I
right.
haven't heard of it. And they sell stuff. It's got a catchy logo. The kids like it. It's cheap.
Right.
It's gonna just disintegrate. So you have to buy a new one of
Right.
sport, a sports vest or whatever. But the kids like it.
Well, some of these are also examples of foreign entrants coming into the market, like Uniqlo, H&M, and Zara, that have taken away the market share.
But Zara does it by saying, I'm going to own all the supply chain and I can just do everything super, efficiently, right? And be that distributor, basically, that's just putting product out there, right?
right, Apple.
Well, right. Why wouldn't Apple make a watch, a car?
Right, why not,
right?
right?
I mean, something like 92% of Apple's sales is 3 products: phone, tablet, computer.
Yeah.
Like 92% of multiple billions of dollars, 3 products. That's it. To your point, Anthony.
When they blew out their expectations on the new iPhone this year, this holiday season.
All right, let's quickly change topics. I think we have a few minutes here left to wrap up. Anthony, you brought up the point before about real estate, and it's sort of a great transition from the last panel. What strategies can a retailer pursue to ensure their locations will be relevant over the life of a lease?
Yeah, so for us, when we're looking at our retailers, I mean, again, it goes to experiential. So you either, you got to decide what you're going to be, right? Are you going to be more of a showroomer, or are you going to be, something that, is more of a treasure find kind of mentality? So if you're a big box, you almost have to be kind of a more treasure find mentality. You got to have a lot of different things to drive people in. If you're in the smaller side and the specialty retailer side, you can be, very neat and nimble. And so what you want in retail space today, and what you're seeing, is people go smaller and smaller with these spaces, right? How do I get down to 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, 1,500 square feet, and be just a small, nimble guy where I can show off a little bit of the product and then drive people to my online site or, to order it or whatever on delivery, with the idea being that you're really just trying to foster an omni-channel environment. But you got to get your retail footprint down. And the challenge today, as you're looking at new sites, is, is again the kind of mall dynamics, right? If you're in an A+ mall, yeah, you can probably sign up for something that's 10 years and option periods and stuff like that, because that mall will probably stay a great mall. But especially in the B and C malls, it's very difficult to know whether or not your tenants are going to be around you and whether there's going to be enough traffic driving and all that stuff. So you're seeing you're seeing people push a lot harder for kick-out clauses and things like that, and leases to, in order to make sure that, or ability to kind of change square footage and stuff like that to try and push for, some flexibility down the road if you're going to sign a new lease today.
Let me ask you a question. You raised a good point, and it's certainly something that I've seen a lot, where these specialty retailers have all, especially ones that have been through a restructuring, have rationalized their store base or have tried to shrink the size of their store down to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 square feet. How do you reconcile that with some of the names we just talked about, like the Uniqlos or H&M or Forever 21, that are opening up 10, 12, 15,000 foot stores? And I think H&M just put out a release that their goal is to open a store. I want to say it was a store, I think a day over the, no, I'm sorry, a store a week over the next year. So they're opening over 50 stores. I mean, how do you reconcile that?
Well, are you looking at 3 years or are you looking at 10 years from now? Right? For the next 3 years, that's going to be a great strategy for them. We'll come back in 10 years and see whether or not they're paying for some of those mistakes.
Well, a couple things. So, one, it's cheaper to open a store today than it used to be. The fixtures are such that you can, depending on how you fit out a store, and American Apparel is really good at this, they can open a store for less than $15,000. It's amazing, just by the fixtures that they used. The second thing is that there are, so when I was doing Kmart, I watched Walmart. We all watched Walmart. Walmart were just abandoned locations. They wouldn't like refit, refurbish. They would abandon an entire superstore and they would build another one less than 2 miles away. And it blew our minds, and we predicted at the time, Walmart is not going to be here, 10 years down the road. Well, Walmart's here 10 years down the road. Right. But it was just amazing to me. So
You see Costco doing the same thing.
Yeah, the point of my comments is there are retailers that just execute very well. I mean, everybody knows that Walmart, perhaps rivaled now by Amazon, but has the best logistics system on the planet in terms of supply chain. So if you execute really well in your core strategies as a retailer, you're going to be able to push the envelope in other areas, like opening stores or abandoning stores when others can't.
But that's the key. That's the key piece, is the abandoning stores. That discipline, right? Because it's hard to have the discipline to be able to go and say, "Hey, we're going to take a $20 million charge for abandoning these handful of stores or whatever," right? And a Walmart's been so successful over time. Those things didn't necessarily gain a lot of notice when they were closing a store here or whatever. But they were smart about rationalizing their footprint all the way along. It'll be interesting to see, that's where some of these guys they wait too long to do that, or they don't do it as part of their ordinary course of business, and then they get tripped up. Right. But if they do, then you're right, you can be successful.
All right, I've got one final question, and I'll open up to some final comments. I've heard a debate about, whether or not teenagers today go to the mall or they don't go to the mall, and I've asked a number of people for their perspectives, and I hear differing views. I hear that thrown around as a reason why, a lot of retailers have gone under. I mean, Perry, you've got teenage boys. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, they could care less about them all. I mean, it's anecdotal. It's not, but it's very. I mean, the mall experience is different. However, that being said, I think there's a place for brick and mortar. I think Anthony's right. I think the survivors will be the A malls and the B plus malls. The C malls are going to have a tough time of keeping tenants. But I think the notion that brick and mortar is dead is exaggerated. So maybe in 10 years we'll come back and you'll laugh at me, but I don't think brick and mortar is dead.
I wouldn't say that either. I would never say that. Brick and mortar will have a component. As with most of these industries, there's a decline phase or whatever, and then there's a stabilization, right? I mean, at some point, there will be, there's a reason for a brick and mortar to exist. Like I said, it's experiential, but I think you'll see more experiential stuff driven into the malls. And, as I said, we do a lot of restaurant stuff. I mean, restaurants are the beneficiary of this because kids don't want to hang out, so they're hanging out at Starbucks and at restaurants and things like that much more than they, where they used to hang out at malls. And so you do see, people still need entertainment. They still need a reason to go out. They still need something to do when they don't want to sit at home. And yes, is it a little bit easier to sit at home? Yes. Is it a little bit easier to order from home, on your e-commerce? Certainly. But people like to get out. They like to socialize. They like to do stuff. So, these trends aren't going away. You just need to, in retail, you need to give them reasons to do that in your locations as opposed to, just relying on, hey, they're going to go here anyway.
I've got 4 kids between 18 and 23. The 2 eldest only shop online. The 2 middle kids still go to the mall.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're just about out of time. Any final comments from any of the panelists?
Well, I would just say that it's a very interesting dynamic that we're going through because as retailers try and find their footing in this environment, it will be interesting to see how people play off the showrooming versus driving experience or brand or and how they compete with e-commerce. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about e-commerce because everyone spends a lot of time talking about e-commerce today, but the true omni-channel type strategies where you can drive people into the store with what you're doing with them online and vice versa, those are the ones, and the retailers that are the best at that are gonna win in this environment.
My comment would be that for those of us who are professionals, retail will be a sector which will keep us busy for the next 10 years.
Van?
My last comment is thanks for sticking it out until cocktails. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks.